Hey everyone, how's it going today? So what am I working on now? Well, got a Chevy Malibu, and it's the 2.4 Ecotech motor. And guess what? The water pump's leaking. I've never done one before. This is going to be a first for me. And so I looked it up, and I saw what's involved in doing it. And you need a special tool to do this. And a lot of times when you see you need a special tool, you look at it and you're like, yeah, I could probably work around that. Well, you know what? I probably could. But I don't want to. The reason being is this water pump is driven by the timing chain. Yep, the timing chain. It goes in through the back side of the motor, through the cover rather, and there's an access hole in the front. So you got to take the access plate off to access the inside where the gear is. Then you got to unbolt the gear from the pump. Well, what happens when you unbolt it? It could drop in the motor. So they actually make a special tool to hold it in place. Looking at it now, I think you got to take two bolts out, and this tool will hold in the bolt holes and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm not 100% certain. I'm going to learn as I go along here. It's possible that the timing gear that goes, or the water pump gear, has its own threaded holes that this tool will go into. I'll show you this in a second. But let me show you what I got. So here is the car right here, and let's go underneath. Sorry, I got the sniffles again. I've had a sinus infection that just will not go away. But anyway, as you can see, there's the backside of the water pump. There's the timing cover. There's the water pump. Water pump's got the drain plug on it. So you got to unbolt that whole thing and take it off. And this rear housing with the drain plug cover, that comes with the pump. But the pump goes through the front cover. And the front cover, as you see there, has that access plate. You take that off, that's how you access the gear. So, obviously leaking. This has been leaking for a while, she told me. And she finally had enough because she's putting in coolant constantly. So, here is the pump. And doing a job like this, I'm only going to get a premium pump. I'm not going to get a cheap pump. I will never get a cheap pump anyway, but just letting you know, for this, definitely I would not recommend getting a cheap pump. So this one has a limited lifetime warranty. It's 100% new. I would never put a reman on it as a water pump. I would never do that. But here's the tool. There's a couple of different versions. This is a Lyle tool, and you can get this at the parts store. The parts store actually had this in stock. And if you look close, there is dust galore on this thing. So they gave me, they charged me a little more, I think, for the dust. Because, you know, it's just, that means it's like an antique or something. But it gives you instructions, tells you what to do. So I'm going to take this thing out of the wrapper, and judging by the tool, these little pins here, these are going to go through bolt holes here, or, like I said, the gear itself might have bolt holes. And I'm thinking that's what it is. The gear might have bolt holes because I see an access hole here to get through into here, and that would leave, I would think, judging by that, it would leave the other two bolt holes accessible. So let's get going on this. I'm going to let it down. I'm going to take the airbox and stuff off so I can see what it looks like from up top. And I know I've seen other guys do this, and if you're doing it in your garage, it might be easier, where when you're doing it from up top, you take the overflow bottle out and stuff like that, and you access it through the backside. I think I can access this through the underside, but let's find out. So let's let it down and let's see what we got. Here's the underside of it. So what I'm going to do, I can see that this boot was never put on. Oh, look at that. Look how nice that is. Oh, cool. Okay, I didn't touch any of this, so somebody else has been here doing something, and they didn't secure any of this. So who knows why? I do know that this car was at another shop, and the other shop diagnosed the water pump leaking. And what the hell all this goo is on here? But yeah, the other shop diagnosed a water pump leaking. You can access the back. Maybe it's the tube that runs. There's a feed tube. Maybe that runs over on that side. That's why they take that out. They take that bottle out. So let me continue getting this out because it'll make my life easier getting down there to that plate. You can just see it there. So let's keep going with this. Anyway, it was at another shop, and the other shop gave them an astronomical price to change this. I'm not cheap, and I know I'm not cheap, but the price that this other person gave was just, that was a ripoff. plain and simply a ripoff. Basically, it's double what the price should be to do the water pump. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. So let me get this going. Let me get the rest of this out. As you can see, the air box is out completely. Got everything going from there. I undid this wiring harness and moved it out of the way and tucked it off to the side. That hooks up to that plug down there. It just fell off to the side, no big deal. But I got all the bolts out of the cover, so now the cover should just pop off. I just dropped one of the bolts, so it should be underneath the car somewhere. But that should come right off, and then I should have access to the gear itself. Let me see. All right. It's got a fine layer of silicone on it. So I don't know if anybody's ever been in here. It's possible. Thing's got 100-something thousand miles on it. But there's the gear inside there. So now I got to figure out how this whole thing goes together. I don't know if I got to take the mount out and maybe jack this thing up so I have a little more room so I can see what I'm doing, unless I can get it from underneath. I don't know. Like I said, first time I've ever done one, so I'm learning, just like you. Can I just tell you, every day I am amazed by the stupidity of designers, the engineers, whatever. I don't understand it. I'm trying to take off something simple, the inner shield. Not that difficult normally, but check this out. So this is the shield that goes, up inside and protects the belt. I just moved it down to here, but it goes up, hold on. It goes up in here to protect the belt. So I figure, okay, and I realize it tucked behind here. Okay, no big deal. We'll lower the fender shield out, or inner wheelhouse, whatever you want to call it, to get this out. I'm going to get this out, and now I got to lower the front valance down, or not the valance, the lower trim here, because up inside, you can't even see it, there's push pins. There's push pins going this way to hold this in place. Why? What's the reason? Stupidity. Gee, I wonder why I got to wonder why the labor time calls for 5 hours to do this pump. Well, because you probably can speak English. You got to spend 3 hours pulling the darn shields out. Anyway, so it turns out they have even more push pins tucked up inside there. So really, all I'm going to do at this point is I got it down enough. So now I'm just going to bungee cord it off to the side there. This way, I can take the inner wheelhouse and stick it back in place. Because then I have access to the timing chain area. Sorry for the rant. I get so twisted when it comes to stupid stuff like that. And that's stupid. But anyway, so now I got it out of the way, so check this out. So now if you look up inside, you can see the gear, and you can see it does have the threaded holes for the tool to go into, which I wasn't sure, because like I said, I never really looked it up. I just kind of did a quick overview of how this job is done. I didn't really get into detail of looking at it. So now I got to get the tool on there, and then you got to bolt the tool down to the cover because you want to make sure that the thing doesn't slide. Because if that gear slides, you're in trouble. If it slides, then you lose timing chain tension and everything else. Yeah, not a good thing. So let me go hook the tool up, and then I'll show you what it's like when it's hooked up. And there, the tool is in place, and the two pin bolts are tight on there. And all I did was tighten up with a stubby 10 millimeter, and you don't have to go bare tight, just snug and you're done. So now the actual tool is like slightly loose, because what I have to do is I got to rotate it over so I can line up this hole here and the hole up top with one of the slots. You're not going to line up like opposites of one another, but that's the reason for this hole too, so you can get to the gear bolt. So let me rotate the motor and let's see what it does. All right, let me zoom out on that like that. Put a wrench on that, and see that? See how it rotates? So now, I'll kind of get in the middle, but that should line up two of the bolt holes there. So now I can put two of the bolts back in. I did find that one that hit the floor. I can put the two stubby bolts back in just to lock the plate in place, because like I said, you definitely do not want that to move, because if it does, you got a major problem. Now, one quick thing. These are the original bolts that went through that cover and held that cover to the timing cover. Use these bolts. Don't use like the wrong bolt. Don't use like too long of a bolt or whatever, because you don't know what's on the other side of that timing cover. You know, you could hit the gear. You could hit the timing chain, and damage something. Always be mindful of the bolts that you're using to hold something in place, or even if you're pulling a motor out, be mindful of the bolts that you're using. Anytime you got to use a bolt that didn't come out of that specific spot, be mindful of what it is, because you definitely don't want to cause a problem. So these are the original bolts that held that in place. I'm going to use these to hold that tool in place. You ever hear the saying, every 15-minute job is one broken bolt away from being a nightmare? Well, not a broken bolt. Well, let me give you a little tip. I didn't think about it at the time. Should have, but I didn't. This tool. If you're using this tool, don't have it in any of these positions. Have it in this position. So when you put the bolts in, you don't have this like this and have an opening towards the bottom. Because I went to go catch the top bolt, and guess what? You got it. Fell in the motor. So it fell into the timing chain area somewhere. I couldn't tell. I heard it go kink inside, and don't know where it landed. So I'm going to take the oil pan off in hopes that it's somewhere easy to find. So it happens. Not happy about it, but it happens. What are you going to do? So I'm going to drain the oil. Let me take the oil pan off. Hopefully I could see it that way. If not, I'm taking the timing chain cover off, because got to find it. Can't leave it in there. All right, let's start with that. This is going to be a much longer video than I anticipated. It is what it is. What am I going to do? Things happen. If this is the worst thing that happens today, today's a good day. So I got the pan off, and of course there was nothing in the pan. And let me show you what I got. So here's the pan itself, and I figured let me dump the oil out of it and look just in case it fell in there. Nothing. So coming up here, I figured, look, there's really not a whole lot of things to see. So up in here is the timing chains. So I'm like, okay. So I went and I started digging up there with a magnet. And lo and behold, I got it. So just another lesson learned. There again, like I said to you guys, I make mistakes. Yeah, it happens. You got to learn from your mistakes. And I learned that you better have that tool facing down, and maybe have like magnet tipped gloves or something like that. But if you have it facing down, you shouldn't have an issue. It was my stupidity right there. Like I said, never did this before. Now I definitely know. Next time I go to do one of these, I'm going to do it the other way. So now let me get that tool back on there and rotate it so it's at the bottom. I'm just happy I got that bolt out. I really didn't feel like taking the timing cover off. They're not a huge big deal to get them off, but it's just more work. So the oil pan, they're not horrendous to get off. You got to lower the cradle a little bit. So I wound up taking that shield out that went right here, the one that I had bungee corded over to that side. You can still see the bungee cord is hanging from the wheel. So I had taken that completely off just to save myself a little aggravation. But yeah, got that off. It's just a bunch of 13s that go up, and then you got a couple of 15s that go into the bell housing. I'm sorry, yeah, 15s and then one 18. And then you have the lower AC compressor bolt you got to take out, which is this one. And then the dipstick tube has a tendency to seize up in these things. So what I did was I just took my MAP gas torch, this thing right here, and I just heated up this area of the pan. You heat it up, and all of a sudden you'll see it release and start to move upward. Obviously, when you do that, you're going to need to replace that O-ring. So I'm going to clean up that bore with a little bit of Scotch-Brite or something like that for when I go back on. Obviously, I got to clean up the whole gasket surface. But in all honesty, it probably took me 20 minutes, maybe, and the pan was out. So, but luckily, I was able to fish it out with a magnet. I never saw it. I just went in there and started fishing around. I don't have a flexible head magnet. I don't know what happened to mine. I have one that comes on like a flexible type wire. I'm going to have to get another one when the Snap-on guy shows up on Tuesday. But yeah, so anyway, live and learn. So let me go back and hook the water pump thing up and then tighten it down, and let's keep going with the job. Got all the oil dripping out of this because I got the pan off. But there, the tool is on, and like I said, put the opening to the bottom so this way I don't make the mistake I made. So luckily the pan is not that hard to come off. Like I said, you got to lower the cradle in that a little bit. But yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the gasket surface so I can get all of that back on and get the oil pan back on, because I'm thinking I might have to jack the motor up. But you know what? Let me try to get the pump off first. Doesn't really matter. It's 6 to 1, half a dozen the other, because the pan has to go back on regardless. But yeah, so let me do that. Let me just see, because like I said, look up in here. Let's see. There, you can see the access to that one bolt right through the that cover there. Now I'm always worried about, you know, you unbolt those things. I'm always worried about the possibility of dropping a bolt in. I already did it once, and now the pan's off, so may as well get this thing switched over before I put the pan back on. So hopefully I don't have to jack it up. If I do, I'm going to put a block of wood or something on that, because that's got a the cap is all like one main girdle as far as I could tell. So all the main caps, see that? It's all one big giant girdle. At least I think that's what it is. That's what it appears to be. So I've never had one of these motors apart. But yeah, so let's get back into taking that pump off and go from there. And there you go. I got the 3 bolts out that hold the gear in place. Now what I did was I took some painter's tape that I have, and I took it and I folded it over on itself into the socket. This way, when I stuck it up inside there, I didn't worry about dropping it. Now the factory tool completely surrounds it, and it's probably a better choice if you can get one. I'm sure you could probably get one on Amazon, but they had this at the parts store and it works. Because this factory tool has 3 of those holes, and it completely covers the whole thing, but it has 3 of those holes, and I'm assuming what it does is when you insert it, it gives you 3 passageways to get the bolts out, so this way you don't have to worry about dropping it inside. So this kind of makes this a little bit inferior, but you know what? It's what they had, and it works. You know, yeah, granted, I made a gigantic mistake, but we live and learn. So now that I got the 3 bolts out, now I can go on to draining the cooling system. I got the cap off up top, so I'm going to take that drain out. That's right there, and I'm going to start draining it, and then I'm bolting it. Now, supposedly there's 2 bolts. One right there, and then there's another one somewhere. I don't know where. I'm going to have to look at a diagram, figure out what bolt is what. But those bolts have to come out in order to get the pump out too. So let me start working on that and get out what I need to get out. Let's make a mess together. Why not? Let's see. Let's see if I can do this and film at the same time. That's the problem. And it's leaking out. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah. Kind of what I figured. I'll make a mess. All right, this is what it is. Okay, well, you see what I'm doing here. I got the 2 bolts in the front. I figured out which one the other one was. You can see it up there. I got those 2 out. Now, they're not going to come out because they hit the frame. If I wanted to get them out, I'm going to have to jack the motor up. Now, the bottom one, once I broke it free, I was able to spin it out with my fingers to that point. The top one, I had to turn it through every single thread until it came out to the end using a ratchet and a short 13. But man, that thing fought me the whole way out. It's like, and you can, you know, go a quarter turn, and it's the entire length of the threads. And finally, once it broke free, I was able to get it out. But it's just like, darn, it's like, it wasn't like super tight. It wasn't loose enough where you could turn it with your fingers. So what I'm going to do now is, let me see what I got to do in the back, because I got to get that pipe out of the pump. That pipe that inserts into the back there, that's got to come out. And I did look, and it says you got to take the cat out. Hopefully I don't, but I'm going to find out shortly. We're back down on the ground because looking from underneath, I'm going to have to take this bottle out. So I understand the reason that the other guys were taking the bottle out. So now, I'll lift this up and pull this back. The thermostat housing, which is down below here, I'm going to take this hose off of here. But the thermostat housing that's down below, it's bolted to the block. And that's got that tube that runs to the back of the water pump. So let me get this hose off of here so I get a better access, better look at what's going on down there. Now with the bottle out of the way, it's still pretty tight in here. There's 3 bolts that I could tell hold this housing to the engine. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, they tell you to take the exhaust manifold out. Hopefully I don't have to do that. If I have to, I have to. But I'm going to take that upper shield off to see if that gives me more room. And it looks like it's got 3 10s. There's one there. There's one, supposed to be one there. One over there. So let me get those out and then let's see where that brings me. Because one of the bolts is actually right behind. If you can see it or not. Where the heck is it? There's a temperature sensor down here. One of them's kind of behind it. Down in here. I don't think I'm going to be able to film it. So let me see what I can do. So I got the shield out, but something interesting I want to show you. Now I know the customer very well. Personally, I know them. And if you look down here, look at the manifold. It's cracked. She's not complaining about any noise. I don't see any carbon around it, which is kind of odd. But one thing too, in the V there, it's very possible, see the O2's right there? It's very possible this could set lean codes because you're introducing oxygen into the exhaust stream above the upstream O2 sensor. So, but she doesn't have a check engine light or anything, so I'm not thinking that's going to be an issue. I'm going to bring it to her attention, see what she wants to do. I'm probably not going to want to fix it, but you never know. I'm going to price out a manifold tomorrow, just see how much they cost. Since I'm right here, you know, maybe she'll want to do it. Who knows? But if you were to take the manifold off, you have whatever manifold bolts up here, and then you have the 3 that hold the converter to the pipe, or the converter to the manifold itself. It's like a separate drum type catalytic converter. So I got to see if one is available. It might be. If this is a common enough problem, you could probably get this aftermarket. So amazingly enough, the local parts store has it in stock. So I called the customer. It cost me 150 bucks. I already called the customer. Customer said, yeah, go ahead and do it. May as well replace it. We're right there. So I'm going to take that out and do that also. So I'm going to start taking this out right now, and let's see where that goes. So remember what I said about lean? And how I'm surprised it's not causing like a lean code or something like that. Check this out. So I got the manifold out, okay? And you can see the crack on the inside. See it there? But now look at this. If you look closely, where is it? Oh, duh, it's right in front of my face. There's a seam there. The manifold closed itself up. It's supposed to be like that, but over there. Look at that. I mean, the manifold is actually warped. Now, check this out. Dun, dun, dun. Here's your O2 sensor. How hot do you think that got? How it's not setting codes is beyond me. How she's not complaining about drivability issues, that's beyond me. I mean, this thing should have some kind of a drivability issue. It's running super lean. It's running so lean, it's distorting the O2 sensor. So, yeah, that's... well, actually, I mean, it's actually not that it's running lean. What's happening is it's getting oxygen in the exhaust, doing this to the O2 sensor, and then the motor itself is compensating by adding fuel to it, which is making the condition even worse. So, yeah, I'm sure this... Sorry about that. This exhaust is glowing red hot. And actually, if you look at the color of the manifold, look at it. It's like somebody heated it up with a torch. That's pretty amazing. I mean, that up here, on this side, it doesn't look so bad, but on that side, look at that. That is quite phenomenal. So, anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. So, anyway, I'm going to have a manifold here tomorrow. I'm going to have to get an O2 for it, too. All right, let's keep going. Oh, actually, let me show you. So now with it out of the way, you can see that pipe real clear. And there's that sensor I was telling you about. And see, there's a 10 kind of tucked behind it a little bit. There's another 10 in there, and there's one on the bottom. Once you get those out, this whole thing should move over. I don't know if there's a gasket there. I'm assuming there is. There has to be. So, but I know the water pump doesn't come with a gasket, so I got to see. Maybe is that a separate gasket? I have no idea. So let me get those bolts out and get this pipe out of the way. And then we'll go from there. Look at the cat. The cat actually, if you look inside it, it don't look bad. I mean, there's a little bit of dirt in there from me taking stuff off, but I was afraid that it might be melted, and it's not, so that's a good sign. It's now the next morning. I actually had to give up on this yesterday, but so now I'm going to try to get those bolts out. Like I said, there's that 10 by the sensor there. That one. There's a sensor there, bolt there, and then there's one underneath. So I'm assuming I just unbolt that and slide that forward, and then this tube should come right out of the pump, because I'm assuming there's an O-ring on that side and an O-ring on this side. They give you one O-ring for this side, but nothing for that side. So I'm gonna get this whole thing apart, and we'll see what we got. So I got everything undone there. The pipe is out. I don't want to disturb that side because the O-ring is still in place. But there is an O-ring style gasket. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it. See that in there? It's an O-ring style gasket. So I'm going to see if that's actually available, which it should be. I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't be for the thermostat housing. So I don't feel like undoing everything over there. It's really not necessary because now there's only 2 bolts left holding the pump in place. One here and one from underneath. And if you look, I actually took the cat out too, just to give myself a little more room. I got the one top bolt out, and now it appears it's just that one bottom bolt, and hopefully I don't get covered in coolant. Hopefully the drain that I already took out is far enough down to where I'm not going to get a big mess. I don't think so. I think it's a pretty low point there. So let me get that 13 out, and hopefully that thing is going to come straight out. Now, one thing that I remember too is going back together, there's an orientation of the gear or the front of the pump to the gear, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. There you see the bolt that's out, so this should just come out. Okay. So now, let's get this out of the place. Hey, you can see the back side of the gear there. Focus in on that. And you can see what I was talking about with the gear itself. So now, on the pump, see where the holes are for the bolts to go through? You got to orientate the new pump like this, because otherwise once it's in place and you try to catch those bolts, that could be an absolute nightmare, especially with the way this thing's set up. So let me get this, oops, hold on. Let me get this back on the bench here, and then I gotta get the new pump, and I kind of have to phase it somehow to make sure that these bolt holes line up with these bolt holes, like, or relatively in the same orientation. So let me figure that out and then I'll show you. So what I've come up with is, if you look at how this pump came off, the bolt hole is directly halfway in between those 2 raises, whatever it is, basically on each one. So I set this one up so it's about the same. So hopefully when this thing goes back in, I can maybe get in there with a pick to like line the hole up so this way I can get the bolts caught. So let me try that. I'm going to leave it in, I'm going to lay it in place and put it in very loosely with the bolts, just so this way I have some wiggle room with it too. All right, let me go clean up the gasket surface. I got to wipe that down, just clean it up, and then get this thing set in place. Pump's laid in place. Like I said, I left that bolt loose, so this way I could rock it a little bit if I have to try to catch that gear. And I can actually get to the impeller of the pump if I had to, with, you know, the tip of my finger or something to rotate it. It's like a turbo almost, if you think about it, just to rotate it to try to catch the bolts in here. So now, what I need to do is try to figure out, actually I should put this bolt in, get it caught. So this way I can get up there with a mirror and look inside and see what I can see. Okay, if you look up here at the mirror, you can see the bolt holes, and they're not exactly lined up. They are off a little bit. I can't zoom in any more than that. But so now what I got to try to do is go in there with either some kind of a punch or something just to line those holes up, or try to find a 10mm bolt that has like a nippled tip. You know, it's almost got like a narrow tip with no threads on it for a short distance, and then comes to threads, because that will help center it and line it up. So let me see what I can find, let me see what I can do, and then we'll figure it out from there. This is what I was talking about with a bolt, and I was able to use this to get it centered up. But one thing of note here I want to point out, somebody apparently had done a water pump on this thing at one point in the past. Those are the bolts holding the gear in place. 3 different bolts. That bolt's got rust on it, which tells me that was probably mounted to the exhaust, the cover, you know, that piece, the heat shield rather, that was mounted there. This is probably one of the originals, or that's one of the originals. I don't know which one now it should be, honestly. So we lost bolts there somewhere. Where they are, who the heck knows? So I know they're not in the oil pan because I got the oil pan off. But so now I'm gonna have to try to find 3 matching bolts. I'm assuming it's probably gonna be the short ones, but I don't know. It could be slightly longer. I do have a little bit of room behind the pump. Plus the longer ones, if you look, I mean, I got a little bit of room behind it, but the longer ones, if you consider the length of the, or the thickness of the actual gear is probably like that. So I'm gonna say that we're gonna wanna go with a thicker bolt. Yeah, all right, so let's get this going. I had found 3 bolts that would go in with no issue. I'm actually torquing these bolts. You really should. They're 89 inch-pounds. And if you don't have an inch-pound torque wrench, it's just, it's not super tight. I mean, think about it. It's only a 6mm bolt with a 10mm head. Now I have to use this kind of a setup to get in there because to try to get clearance for the torque wrench. This is a socket that I use to get the bolts actually in, and I used tape on the end and folded it over to get the bolts in. I did find 3 bolts that were all the same length. Actually, the cover bolts, the cover that goes over that, the gear, over that access hole, those bolts that were in the cover are like the perfect length, so I used those. I'm more concerned about having the gear correct than I am about having the cover correct. I'm not concerned about it, but I'm concerned about both ends, but it's a little more crucial to have the right hardware in the gear to the pump than it is for the other end. Obviously, I can use a slightly shorter bolt. All I'm doing is tightening down on the gasket surface. I'm not like a crucial engine component. So those bolts I'm confident are the correct size, because one of those bolts, the one that was like the longer one that matched up with the kind of rusted one, I'm pretty confident it was the right bolt. So, like I said, I'm not overly concerned about it. I do have other hardware that I could use on the cover, and I'm going to use something that's about the same length. I don't have anything that's exact. I have some that are a touch shorter or a touch longer. The ones that are a touch longer, I can always grind the tip down a little bit. I don't want to do that inside the motor. So, yeah, so I'm going to get this tool off, and I'm not sure if I recommend this tool. I'm not sure I'm really happy with it. I'll explain that in a minute. So the mounting bolts are tight. The one down there, the one up there, and the same in the back. I got those in tight. I changed the O-ring on the pipe and I lubed up with training gel. And as you see inside the water pump, I did the same thing. Now, little dilemma here. The gasket that goes inside here on the housing, I showed you from up top. There's a gasket, a rectangular shaped gasket that goes in here that fits. Let's see if I can see it, if I can focus in on it. It fits onto that port. Anyway, fitting onto that port, nobody has that gasket. Nobody. None of the local auto parts stores have it. The dealer doesn't have it, so we're going to have to use silicone on that. I prefer not to, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Basically, I'm going to clean it down really good with rag. There is no coolant that's hanging out in that area because I already drained all the coolant out of it, but I'm going to clean it off with some brake clean too. This way the silicone has something to adhere to. If you don't clean off the coolant and get it nice and dry, and you try to put silicone on it, the silicone's just not going to adhere. It's going to pull right off. So I prefer to do that. This way it adheres. I don't even think I need it, but just as a secondary step, just to make sure. I'm surprised it doesn't come with the water pump. You have to take that housing off. So why would it not come with the water pump? It makes no sense. But anyway, I'm going to get that on, and then I'm going to take the tool off, and then I'm going to discuss why I don't recommend that tool. The more I think about it, the less I like it, and I'll explain why. You know, the special tool that held the gear. All right, the pipe is inserted, and I did put some silicone on that. I cleaned it off nice, and now I gotta go from up top and catch the bolts and get that bolted down. Now, one thing, when you're doing stuff like this, radiators, anything like this, where it comes with the drain plug already installed, make sure you double check it, make sure it's tight, because I've seen that before where stuff like that isn't tight and it bites you down the road. You know, all of a sudden you come to find out that, hey, it's not tight and it fell out. So why don't I like this tool? Okay, first off, the factory tool or the ones I've seen on the Snap-on truck in the past, which like I said, I never needed this tool before until I did this water pump for the very first time just now. The factory tool is a complete circle. It's basically what you see here, but double. And then you'll have the bolt holes like this one, and if you look, it goes all the way down. Basically, this thing just about sandwiches up against the pulley. So when you're either installing or taking out those bolts, you don't have any chance of them dropping into the motor, like what I did. So, also this leaves an opening, as you saw with an install, it leaves an opening for anything else to possibly fall inside the motor. If you're doing it on a engine stand, okay, this is probably a good idea, or a decent idea. In a car like this where it's tight, accidents can happen, as I showed you, just happened to me. So it just added some aggravation. Had this been a complete round circle, it would have never happened. There's no chance. Like when you're putting a bolt in, the bolt goes through that tube, that opening, and it has no chance of falling on this side because these pins are all the way back like this once it's down in place. And actually the O-rings, you could feel the O-rings getting pulled into the tool. So it'll come back and actually sandwich through. So this thing's almost flush. Like I said, it's off slightly. It's not completely flush to the gear. But at least at that point, you don't have a chance of dropping a bolt inside the motor. With this, you have every chance of dropping a bolt inside the motor. So anyway, that's just, even when you take the other two out, what's keeping it from dropping inside the motor? Nothing. Nothing. So, I don't know. Not a huge fan. I just figured I'd show you that. I'm going to probably buy the correct tool if I ever have another one that needs to do. And there we go. Everything's assembled there. The water pump itself is tight. The gear is torqued down. I don't know if you can see anything there. Yeah, I mean, there's a very light touch of silicone in there. But I put a very, very light layer, so you may not see anything squished through. But yeah, so now I'm going to put the cover back on it. Same thing here. The inspection cover for the gear, or access cover, whatever you want to call it. Same thing here. Nobody has a gasket for this, so that is actually a steel or a tin gasket that's there, and it has a coating on it. And actually, it feels almost like one of those pop tops because it's actually bowed a little bit. But anyway, I'm going to put just a touch of silicone on that, and then I'm going to assemble this whole thing. And yeah, so that's it. Basically, if I run across anything odd, I'm still waiting for the manifold to get here. If I run across anything odd while I'm assembling this, I'll add a video, or add to the video for that. All right, let's get going. Okay, I cleaned off the gasket surface on the oil pan and I added some silicone to it. I've had the same tube of silicone now for a while. I think I only used up maybe a quarter of this tube. This is the ultra grade, good stuff. I only maybe used up a quarter of it to do this. Now you got to remember on these, that's the oil pump pickup right there, which is right there. As you can see, it's dripping oil. So just as I'm ready to put this thing up in place, I'm going to wipe that down with some brake clean, just to make sure it's nice and clean. I got the rest of it all cleaned off. I Scotch-Brighted everything. Got a new O-ring on a dipstick tube. I also put some silicone on there to be on the safe side. Let's see, what else did I do? Where the dipstick goes in, I actually cleaned the inside of that out with Scotch-Brite pad also. So, and as you can see, that's not a very thick layer of silicone. You don't need a gigantic thick layer. You don't need to use like 2 tubes on there. So, yeah, let me clean off that oil that's leaking and get this thing ready, and let's get it in place. Everything went together smooth with the oil pan. There's some residual oily substance on there that I'm going to clean off. But anyway, that's the carrier for the axle. But if you look, you can see you don't have like extra cheese pizza, goo hanging down, which I've seen people do that. They'll put so much silicone on, and when they tighten the pan up, you'll actually get it like dripping out. I've seen people do it. It's amazing. Yeah, so it's looking good. I'm happy with that. That about matches what the factory does, as a matter of fact. So I'm good with that. So now everything's going back together. Always make sure your drain plug is tight so you don't accidentally have a problem going down the road. I already made sure that drain plug was tight on the cooling system. And we have the new manifold here. Sorry for the mess. I just got everything all hanging out here. But there's the old one, there's the new one. Always match up, make sure everything looks good, which it does. Everything looks fine. I already went over everything. Here's the new O2, which looks a lot healthier than that. So I'm going to get this all together now, and see how we make out. New manifold is in place, really no big deal. The bolts themselves are a little bit of a pain getting onto the head, but not, like I said, not a big deal. So now I'm going to catch the O2 first before I put the shield on. The reason I'm doing that is the reason I waited so long to put the O2 in it. I didn't want to take a chance of possibly hitting it and damaging it. So now I'm going to put that on and then put the shield on. Got to remember to put oil in it and then put all the air cleaner stuff back together, and then we should be good to go. So we have oil in it now. We have a new filter in it now. And I got coolant in it. Probably going to have to top it off. It's probably going to burp out some more air. I got the air box in it. Clip that. So anything else I could think of? Let's see, mounts tight, the sensors are hooked up. Let's see, drain plugs are in. I still have to tighten up the exhaust where the front pipe comes up, the support bracket. I just have to tighten that up. You got to leave that loose so you can catch those 3 bolts that come up in the cat. So let's see how this thing starts. Oops, hello. Oops, sorry about that. All right. Sounds okay. I'm sorry I got the sniffles. Like after the issue with my foot, I wound up getting a flu. And ever since then, I can't get rid of the sniffles. But whatever. It's neither here nor there. Yeah, so I'm going to put this thing up in the air, double check everything. Obviously, you got to double check your oil level and stuff like that. So whenever you take a pan off, usually when you go to refill it, it's going to take a half quart or more over what you normally do on an oil change. So, yeah, let's put this up in the air and see what we got. Alright, so everything looks good. Nothing out of the ordinary. Water pumping that looks good. So, yeah, this is the bolt I was talking about here. This bolt that runs through. That's the support for the cat. You got to leave that loose. This way you can catch the bolts up top. If you tighten it up, you'll never catch the bolts. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. So I'm just going to button this up and take it for a road test. I guess that's about it. All right, I hope you got something out of that video. I mean, I learned something. There you see, I created a disaster. Accidental, but I created a disaster. Thank God I realized I dropped the bolt in there, because had I not, and that thing caught the timing chain, I'd be buying this person a motor. So anyway, I guess that's about it. So getting something out of my videos, hit that like button. If you could, please subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe too. I said it. All right. Anyway, that's it. Have a great day. Keep wrenching. I still got to put the shields and stuff back on, especially that stupid nightmare shield underneath there. Anyway, that's it. All right. Keep wrenching.